Greetings. Hello, everyone. My name is Akam Rahman. I'm the Operations Branch Chief of the Division of Energy Assistance, Office of Community Services. On behalf of OCS, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, providing a 60-minute training for the fiscal year 2020 Household Report long form. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Torgerson of Verb Associates and Dan Bosch from Apprise. As you know, in March 2020, the CARES Act was signed into law. This act provided $900 million in supplemental funding for LIHEAP. Grantees that obligate these funds in fiscal year 2020 and 2021 will need to carefully track and report on the LIHEAP CARES Act funds separately from the rest of the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 funding. OCS has gotten approval to make non-substantive changes to the carryover and reallotment report and the household report, which is the topic of today's webinar. In October, we issued an action transmittal on the carryover and reallotment report, and earlier this month, we also issued an action transmittal on the household report, both long and short form. As you know, the long form applies to states, the Washington, D.C., and 3 territories. This group of grantees are also the audience of this webinar. We're working with Apprise, our training and technical assistance contractor, to host a series of webinars covering various reporting topics relevant to these new forms. Today's webinar has 4 purposes. First, the webinar will provide a brief overview of the purpose and the use of the household report. Second, it will explain the key concept that will assist grantees in accurately completing the report. Third, the webinar will review changes made to the report based on the award of the LIHEAP CARES Act fund. Finally, the webinar will provide reminders to help you submitting the report. We appreciate your time for joining us today. We hope this is helpful as you prepare to complete your report. Once again, welcome to the fiscal year 2020 Household Report webinar. I'm now handing over to Melissa from Verb Associates. Melissa?
Thank you, Akam. Today's webinar is 60 minutes long, and it's designed to review key information and give you a detailed review of FY 2020 form changes. The slides for today's webinar are available in the sidebar of your GoToMeeting page. There are 2 PDF forms there. The webinar is also being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. If you have a question during the webinar, you're encouraged to go ahead and enter them into the GoToWebinar question box. You can see the screenshot here shows you where to do that. Jorge, who is running the show here, will take your submitted questions and review them, and will respond to them at the end of the webinar. Or if there isn't time, or if it's a very specific question, we'll answer it via an email from the Apprise staff. Dan?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is a slide showing the outline for today's presentation. As you can see in the handouts, you can download the slides, and you can also download a copy of the instructions for the Household Report long form. So this outline is just helpful if you download the slides. So we want to start with just a brief overview of the Household Report. The Household Report has been collected by OCS since the 1980s. It's an important report because it allows OCS to report information to Congress, to LIHEAP stakeholders about LIHEAP outcomes, how many households are served by state, by region, by assistance type. And it is required for this information to be reported to Congress according to the LIHEAP statute. For the household report, there's 2 types of data that need to be reported on the long form. There's information on households that received LIHEAP assistance during a fiscal year, and information on households that applied for LIHEAP assistance during that same fiscal year. The data that gets reported in the household report is published in the annual LIHEAP report to Congress. It's also available to you and available to the public in the LIHEAP data warehouse on the LIHEAP Performance Management website. And it is used to respond to inquiries related to the LIHEAP program. As Akam mentioned in the introduction, the household report form has been changed for FY20 as well as for FY21 in response to the passage of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act. OCS released the LIHEAP CARES Act funds in May of this year, and in the Dear Colleague letter announcing the award of those funds, notified grantees that they'd need to track, account for, and report on those funds. To allow OCS to monitor the use of those funds and how those funds are being used to benefit LIHEAP recipient households, the household report form has been changed, and we're going to review those changes in this webinar. We're going to start with just a brief summary in this slide of those changes, and then later in the webinar, we're going to dive in and look at them in more detail. The main change to the household report is that each line, each item in the report you've done in the past has now been expanded to multiple lines. You can see that in the image at the bottom of this slide. The first line for each type of assistance, for example, for heating assistance, is where you'll report on all households that receive that assistance regardless of the funding source. And this is the same information you would report in the past. How many households got heating assistance? How many households got cooling assistance, for example? The second line is new, and that's where you'd report all households that were assisted with CARES Act supplemental LIHEAP funding. And then finally, there is a third line, and it is reserved for the event that there are additional supplemental funds that are issued for LIHEAP. So there were not additional supplemental funds outside of the CARES Act that were issued in FY20. So that line is not active in your FY20 report, but it's there in case those funds get released during FY20. So we will not be focusing on that this webinar, but that's why you see a third line. Now we're going to go over some key concepts for reporting on the household report.
So in the household report, you're going to report on two different kinds of households. In the first section, you're going to be reporting on assisted households, and those are households where a client received LIHEAP assistance using federal LIHEAP funds during the federal fiscal year. That's October 1 to September 30. Some of you have different program years, so it's important to know that the reporting period is from October 1 to September 30. In this area of the report, you're going to report on households, not total persons. So you're going to report on each household as one household. You're also not going to count approved households that did not receive assistance. Some of you may make pledges or commitments all the way up to October 1, for example, but you won't pay them until after October 1. And so you're not going to count those households unless they received the benefit. Applicant households are households where a client applied for LIHEAP assistance during the federal year, whether they got it or not. And the definition of applicant is not defined by this LIHEAP statute. And so for states, these applicant households and the definition of an applicant household looks very different across each state. Some of you may report significantly more applicants than assisted, and others of you may have pre-screening processes or other processes in place that make it so that the number of assisted and applied are not much different. On the household report, you're reporting information for each type of assistance and across types of assistance. So LIHEAP benefit recipient households may receive one benefit for one type of assistance. So the Smiths received a heating benefit. They might also have gotten one type of assistance but multiple benefits. So for example, the Johnson household received 2 year-round crisis benefits. And they might also get multiple types of assistance. So in this example, the Lee household received 1 heating benefit and 1 cooling benefit. In the household report, you're always reporting households, not the occurrence of benefits. So for example, even though the Johnson household got 2 crisis benefits, they're only going to be counted once under year-round crisis assistance. And even though the Lees got multiple benefits, they're going to be counted once in heating and once in cooling.
There are key pieces of information, of data that you need for each of your households that receives LIHEAP. They are all listed on this slide, so this slide's really helpful to hang on to and to pass along to any staff that need to pull data for the household report. So there's 3 categories. You need to be able to tell what kinds of assistance each household got. And as Melissa mentioned, you may be a state that provides a household with 1 benefit, 1 type of assistance, or you may provide multiple types of benefits. So you need to know if a household got regular heating assistance, crisis assistance, other types of assistance, even weatherization, and nominal benefits if you provide those. The second piece of information you need is to categorize each household into a poverty interval to be able to report them in the household report in Section 2. So each household, you need to have their assigned poverty interval, and that's based on their household income and the number of household members they have. And then the last type of information is you'll need information on the presence of any vulnerable members in a household. For LIHEAP, vulnerable members include elderly household with someone who's 60 years or older, if a member of a household is disabled, or if there's a young child under age 6. There's also an optional section to break down the number of young children under age 6 at the end of the household report. Now we're going to go and discuss some of the general reporting reminders for the household report. So the first reminder is that you're reporting information for each type of assistance that you provide. You'll have to report the count of households that were assisted or that applied for each type of LIHEAP assistance during the past federal fiscal year, which for FY20 was October 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2020. A household can be reported in more than one of the counts across the report. So if a household got heating, cooling, and weatherization, it would be reported in all 3 lines, for the line for heating, the line for cooling, and the line for weatherization. And if you indicated in your FY20 model plan you'd be providing cooling assistance or another assistance type, for example, we'd expect in your FY20 household report that you would report households as having received that type of assistance. There is a reminder on the bottom of this slide that for Section 2, where you report households by poverty interval, we'd expect you would report households that fall within your gross income thresholds that you specify in your model plans. And the link at the bottom of this slide is for the 2019 poverty guidelines, which are the guidelines you would use for assigning households to their poverty interval. The household report also asks you to report information that cuts across types of assistance. There's 2 fields. One is reporting the number of households that received any type of assistance, and one is reporting the number that received bill payment assistance. Both of these are unduplicated counts where you want to count a household only once. For any type of assistance, you're reporting the number of households that got any of the types of assistance that are listed in the household report. That includes assistance with paying their energy bills, emergency crisis assistance, weatherization, and equipment repair and replacement assistance. Bill payment assistance is just focused on benefits that you give to households to help pay a share of their energy bills and utility deposits. So the difference between any type and bill payment is that bill payment would not include weatherization or equipment repair and replacement. So there's an example on the bottom of this slide. 3 households got different types of assistance. Household A got a heating benefit. Household B got a heating and a cooling benefit. Household C received only weatherization. If you look down the columns, that first column's heating, there's 2 households that got heating assistance, household A and B, so you would report 2 for heating assistance. Household B was the only household that got cooling assistance, and household C was the only household that got weatherization. So each of those columns has only a value of 1. When we're looking down at the unduplicated fields, any type of assistance, there's 3 households that received assistance. So you would report 3 there, even though we're talking about 4 different benefits, since household B got 2 benefits. For bill payment assistance, we would only count household A and household B, because household C received weatherization, which isn't a LIHEAP benefit to help pay a share of their energy bills. So for bill payment assistance, you would report 2. So this is a helpful slide to just understand the concepts for these 2 reporting items.
So for some of you, you'll need to go out and actually collect and match data from program partners. And the best example of this is weatherization, and for some of you, crisis, because you may not collect this data in your primary LIHEAP systems. So an example is your weatherization department administers LIHEAP weatherization component, and they're maybe in another agency, or they use a different system. Or you have a subgrantee that administers an emergency equipment program, even though you administer all of your other benefits at the state level. In these situations, it's your responsibility to go obtain that household level data from the people who are providing those programs, or the program partners who record this information. In order for you to be able to do an unduplicated count like Dan just showed us, you're going to need to get household level data, because you're going to need to match up the households with the households that you have in your own system before you can do that unduplicated count. Apprise has helped and is willing to help anyone that needs help, assistance with this process, either getting your data from your partners, or once you get it, matching it up to yours so that you can compile the report. So don't hesitate to call if you need help.
The 4th reminder we wanted to emphasize was reporting any type of vulnerability. This is in Section 3 of the Household Report. There's 4 different pieces of information you're asked to report for each assistance type in Section 3. You're asked to report the number of elderly households, the number of households with a disabled member, the number of households with a young child, 5 years or younger. And then you're asked in column D to report the number of households that have a member with any of those 3 characteristics. So the number with at least 1 vulnerable member. As you all know, a household could have a different mix of household members that may have multiple vulnerabilities. But for column D, each household should be counted once if it has any of the 3 vulnerabilities. So that means you would not add A plus B plus C to get the number for column D, but you instead need to produce an unduplicated count of households that meet any of those three requirements.
So the household report includes a note section, which allows you to explain anything from your report that's out of the ordinary. So maybe you have something that you felt didn't quite fit in a spot, or if you got a warning in OLDC and you saw it and you thought, nope, this is right, even though there's a warning, or just anything that you think the people reviewing your report should know when they're reviewing it. Use the notes section liberally, because when a prize reviews your report, if they aren't clear on something, the notes section is the first place they're going to look to see if you've given them some context or some clarification. Otherwise, you'll probably get a call from them. Notes allow for an accurate understanding of your reported data, and they also go into the tables and footnotes in the annual report to Congress. So if your data has a caveat or needs an explanation that you would want your legislator to see, for example, you'll want to include it in this report.
Now we're going to look at the new LIHEAP CARES reporting requirements and spend some time going through those requirements. So as I mentioned earlier, the household report has been expanded to include new lines to capture information about households being served with LIHEAP CARES Act funds. The existing form that you used in prior years had one line for heating assistance, one line for cooling assistance, and so forth for each assistance type. The new form has those same lines, but also has 2 additional lines for each assistance type. The second line is where you would report on all applicable households that were assisted with your CARES funding. The third line is locked from editing and is not applicable for this year, but is reserved possibly for next year. So first, I want to talk about assisted households, which is for sections 1, 2, 3, and 6 of the household report. If you expended any of your LIHEAP CARES funds to provide benefits during FY20, so you obligated your CARES funds and they began to be provided to households in the form of assistance, you'll need to count and report those households in this year's household report. That would include households that received a benefit that was fully paid by the CARES funds, or a benefit that was partially paid with the CARES funds, so a mix of CARES and your regular LIHEAP block grant funds. That would not include households that received a benefit that wasn't at least partially paid by the CARES Act funds. Now there are, as you know, you had the option with your CARES Act funds to obligate all of them during FY20, to obligate some of them, or to obligate none of them and carry over all of your funds to FY21. So if you have not yet expended any of your LIHEAP CARES funds and you didn't provide any benefits during FY20 with those funds, then the total that you'll need to report in that new second line that's labeled for reporting CARES Act funds would be 0 because you haven't yet served households with those funds. Sections 4 and 5 of the household report ask you to report information on the number of applicant households. So if you are a grantee that has started expending your LIHEAP CARES funds during FY20, then you'll also need to count and report the number of LIHEAP CARES applicant households. Now, with all of the applicant information you report in the household report, grantees do use different approaches on how to identify, count, and report the number of applicant households because of differences in how grantees define applicant. If you had a separate application form or process for someone to apply for a CARES funded benefit, then you could use that information to report the number of households that use that form or process. If you didn't have a separate form or a separate application process to provide someone with a CARES funded benefit, then you could report the total number that applied for that type of assistance, repeating the same information you'd report in the first line. Or you could report the number of households that applied for that type of assistance at the point in which you began issuing the CARES funded benefits. So that may have been towards the end of FY20 or during the second half of FY20. So there's flexibility in how to report this information. Here's a picture from the new version of the household report that you'll be able to see in the OLDC system. You can see, as I mentioned, there's 3 lines for heating, 3 lines for cooling. At the bottom is year-round crisis assistance. You only need to complete the first 2 lines for each type of assistance, but the layout looks like this when you see it in OLDC. So the first line is just labeled heating or just labeled cooling, as it was in the past. And for this line, you'll need to populate the information using your data system to report the total number of households that receive that type of assistance. It doesn't matter what funding was used to provide that assistance. It should be across all sources of funding. So that includes your CARES funds. If a household got assisted with CARES, they would be counted in line 1. If they got assisted with your regular block grant funds, they would be reported in line 1. If they got assisted with funds you had carried over from the prior year, they'd also be reported in line 1. And that's consistent with what you've reported in the past. Next slide, Jorge. Line 2 is where you are filtering down to report only the count of households that was assisted with the LIHEAP CARES Act funding. That includes any household that got a benefit that was fully or partially funded with the CARES Act funds. And it should be a subset of households that are reported in line 1 and should not exceed the amount that you would report in the first line. Now, grantees can use the LIHEAP CARES funds to provide benefits to households in several different ways. There's 3 main ways that are described on this slide. One is you may have opted to provide extra supplemental benefits to households that already received benefits for an assistance type using your regular LIHEAP funds. That's the equivalent of increasing the benefit level that you provided to your recipient households. A second option is you could have used the funds to serve new additional households that by providing them with the CARES benefit and providing that assistance to them. So you'll be serving more of your eligible populations using those CARES funds. Then a third way you could have used the CARES funds is to furnish a new type of assistance that you didn't previously offer. That could be a new crisis component, for example. And you could have also used a mix of all of these different approaches. So this is just to highlight some of the different options that grantees have. Now we're going to look at the form and look at a couple different scenarios for how grantees may have used their CARES funds and to see how it impacts how you would report on the household report. So Grantee X provided 5,000 households with heating assistance and 2,000 with year-round crisis assistance using their regular LIHEAP funds. When the LIHEAP CARES funds were issued, Grantee X decided to use those funds to give a supplemental benefit to all 5,000 households that got heating assistance earlier in the fiscal year. So let's see how we would report this together. First, we know that Grantee X decided to use their CARES funds to give a supplemental benefit, and they gave it to 5,000 households. So we'll report 5,000 in line 2 for heating assistance with CARES Act funding only, since 5,000 received that supplemental benefit using the CARES funds. Then we know that they provided 5,000 households with heating overall. So we'll report 5,000 in line 1 as well. Those 5,000 households got a regular benefit and a heating benefit, so only 5,000 received heating overall. Now let's look at crisis assistance. For CARES, we know that Grantee X didn't use their CARES funds to provide any year-round crisis assistance, so we'll put 0 in line 7B. But we know from the first bullet that they provided 2,000 households with year-round crisis assistance, so we're going to report 2,000 in line 7A. In the bottom bullet on this slide, I indicated that 6,000 households received any type of assistance in fiscal year 2020. You can see that's less than if you added heating plus year-round, because some households could have gotten both. So the question is, what should we report in line 12 for any type of LIHEAP assistance with CARES Act funding only? Well, because Grantee X used their CARES funds to give 5,000 households an extra benefit, they're also going to report that 5,000 number in line 12. So this is an example of how you, if you're similar to Grantee X, may be reporting. Now we're going to look at a second scenario. This is Grantee Y. They served more households using their CARES Act funds. So just like Grantee X, they served 5,000 households with heating assistance and 2,000 with year-round assistance using their regular LIHEAP funds. Then when they got their CARES Act funds, they decided to use those funds to serve additional households with heating assistance, and they ended up giving benefits to 3,000 households using those LIHEAP CARES Act funds. So they gave 3,000 households heating assistance with CARES Act funds. So on line 2, heating for CARES Act, we'll put 3,000. Now we also know from the first bullet that they gave heating assistance to 5,000 households earlier with regular funds. So the total number of households that got heating assistance is 5,000 plus 3,000 equals 8,000 households that we'll report in line 1. Now let's look at crisis. They did not use any of their CARES Act funds to provide crisis assistance, so we'll put 0 in line 7B. For overall, they did provide year-round crisis assistance, and they served 2,000 households just using their regular funds. So overall, they served 2,000. So we'll put that in line 7A. In the bottom bullet, I indicated that they served overall 9,000 households, so that goes in line 11. So how many households need to be reported in line 12 that received any type of LIHEAP assistance from CARES Act funds only? Well, they only used those CARES Act funds to serve those 3,000 new households, so in line 12, we're going to put 3,000. Now I have one more example for you, and this is Grantee Z, and they decided to use their CARES Act funds to offer a new type of assistance, a new component. When the CARES Act funds were issued, they created a new crisis assistance component that households could apply for to get emergency assistance related to the COVID outbreak. They gave that assistance to 3,000 households. So this is a new crisis component. It's not their year-round crisis. So in one of the reserved other crisis lines, line M under line 7, we're going to put in, write in the name of this program. That's their COVID crisis program. They used that to serve 3,000 households, so we'll put 3,000 in line M, or in line N, which is the CARES Act portion. Then we'll put 3,000 again for line M, which is overall how many they served with that component. Now, they did not use their CARES Act funds to provide anyone with heating assistance or with year-round crisis assistance, so we'll put 0 in those lines. Finally, we know that they gave heating assistance to 5,000 households, and they gave year-round crisis assistance to 2,000 households. So we'll put those in lines 1 and in line 7A. So overall, they served 7,500 households. But for CARES, they served a total that we'll put in line 12 of 3,000 households with those CARES Act funds. So these examples are shown in the slides if you download them. It can be confusing when you first see it, so I encourage you to just save the slides to help with reporting for these new lines. We do have some recommendations for you as you proceed with your preparing your reports, specifically for your IT staff. The first is that if you already have a query or a system-generated report that you've used before, you can use that to produce the report calculations for all households that would go in the first line for each type of assistance. Then you can produce the equivalent report if you're able to filter to households that received the LIHEAP CARES funds. To do that, you'll need to be able to identify which households got benefits that were funded by CARES and to calculate the report again for those households. Third, we'd recommend you try to check your results that they match what you would expect based on your knowledge of how you've used the CARES funds. Now we're going to look at the report versions and reminders for submitting the report.
So for this household report with the new CARES information, there is a preliminary report due November 30th. And so this is the report that you normally submit with your model plan, and it includes non-final or estimated data. The final report is due December 31st and must contain final data from your tracking systems and program records, all the things that Dan and I just spoke of. Once all your data in the household report is final, it's really important that you select no in response to the question that says, do the data below include estimated figures? And that you uncheck any estimated data checkboxes in sections 1 and 4. You can submit revisions to your reports later if corrections are needed.
There are report validations and checks that occur with the household report. When you enter your data in OLDC and go through the process of saving it and validating it prior to submission, there are checks that are programmed into OLDC, and you may receive a message that gives you a warning or potentially an error based on the data that's entered into your report. Those are meant to be helpful to help you identify if there's any issues or if there's anywhere you may need to include a note to explain a unique aspect of your program that impacts your reporting. Warning messages are meant to be informative. They don't prevent you from submitting. You can still submit your report. But if you have a warning message, you should include a note about why that message occurs. And if you have one that you're not sure about, please reach out to us, especially because the form was changed this year. There can always be messages that come up erroneously, so please reach out to us. Fatal error messages are inconsistencies in reporting that need to be corrected before you're able to submit. So if you receive one of those and you're not able to identify what the cause is, please reach out to us as well. Once your report is submitted, we do check the information for consistency, and we do a validation process. After we finish the check, we reach out with any questions or issues. And then once we do that and you finalize your report, your liaison will accept it in OLDC, and you can always go back later if you need to submit a revision. To submit the report in OLDC, you have to go through a 4-step process. You have to enter the data and save it. Then you have to validate it, which runs those checks. Then you have to certify and submit it. And here's a picture of where those buttons are in OLDC in the red box on this slide. There are only certain individuals who are able to go through the full process and to certify and submit the report. and that needs to be the user who has a grant administrator role by default. So if you're having any difficulties with that, also please reach out to us. So here are some final reminders with the FY20 household report. It has been revised for FY20 and FY21. The purpose is to let OCS track and monitor the use of the LIHEAP CARES funds separately from all other funds. You still need to report the same information that you would have reported last year on total assisted households and on total applicant households for each type of assistance. But you'll also need to report information specifically for households that received LIHEAP CARES funds. There are reserved lines, the third line for each type of assistance, that you do not need to fill out for FY20. To complete your report, you are going to need to use your data reporting system and to be able to distinguish households that received some amount of LIHEAP CARES funds. If you face any challenges with the reporting requirements, please reach out to us and we'll do your best to assist you. The preliminary report is due November 30th. That preliminary report, as Melissa mentioned, you can use estimated data. The final report is due December 31st. And as I mentioned, there are validation checks.
So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about OLDC, but there are some resources on this page. As you know, it's accessed through Grant Solutions, and we have the login information. We've also put the help desk here. We can help you to an extent, but really if it's OLDC related, it's best to get a hold of your or the Grant Center of Excellence Systems help desk, and that information is right here. There are some really great resources that have been put together. If you're new to the household report or you need a refresher or you're experienced, we even have some validation kind of great documents you can use. The poverty guidelines Dan talked about earlier, there's a link to them here. The action transmittal and instructions are important for those of you who haven't read them in a while. It's useful to go back and read the instructions. I've used this check before you submit document with the reports that I've helped states with. It's really valuable. It basically, once you think your report is finished, you use it to go through and kind of check off things you may have missed or double check things. And then anytime you want to look at your past year's household report data, you can go do so on the data warehouse. So just some final reminders about future trainings and webinars. There will be a second webinar on the household report. It'll take place in December, and it'll provide a detailed review of the report for new coordinators or staff. The 2020 performance data form, the due dates haven't been issued, but we're expecting OCS to issue them soon in addition to instructions. For Module 1 in the grantee survey, grantees will need to report the uses of LIHEAP CARES funds separately, similar to what they do, what you just saw in the household report. But for Module 2, the performance measures, there'll be no changes to the reporting requirements. FY 2020 carryover and reallotment report, the final report will be due December 31st. And as Dan mentioned, I think in the webinar that we had in October, which the link is right here, this is a chance for you to use your federal financial report, for example, any closeout that you've done with your subgrantees or your state to kind of true up those carryover and reallotment numbers with your actuals. And so that is due December 31st, 2020. There's a ton of people, clearly, who are here to help you with what you need. We always recommend you get a hold of your liaisons if you have questions, particularly about program design and how that works with these reports. But we're also here to help you with any technical needs you might have. There's a whole slew of people from Apprise who are at the ready, and if one of us can't help you, we'll get you to someone who can. So once again, this is the question layout. This is kind of what you should see on your screen. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in, and then Jorge is going to pass the questions to Dan to answer.
I did also, while Jorge's getting the questions, want to make one point that I forgot to mention was, if you serve households with other non-LIHEAP funds, non-federal LIHEAP funds, such as funds you receive from your state, for the household report, you should be reporting households that received assistance with federal LIHEAP funds. So if you had a household you assisted that received no federal LIHEAP funds, you would not report it in the household report. But if you had a household that received state funds and federal LIHEAP funds, you would report it in the household report. So just a reminder there if you use other sources of funds outside of your federal LIHEAP funds.
Hi, everyone. This is Jorge at Price. Dan, there are a few questions for you and Melissa. So I'll start with the first one, which is, when will the new form be available? Last week, when I attempted to start my report, it was still the old form.
We can reach out and send you instructions. Sometimes the new form is now available in OLDC, but if you had activated the form earlier, like in the summer, before the new form was fully in place, it might be bringing up the old version of the form. So Jorge and I will send you instructions on how to fix that so you get the correct form.
Great. The next question is, our state is considered scenario 2, so serving additional eligible households using CARES Act funding. When reporting in the first line of the report, I'd like to confirm that we are also reporting households that received CARES Act funding as well, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So the first line is all households, so that would include households that only got CARES, households that only got assisted with regular LIHEAP funds, households that got assisted with both. It's the overall number of households that got a specific type of assistance. So that's a great question. There are no lines in the household report where you're going to report regular non-CARES only. Line 1 is all households, regardless of funding type.
There's a follow-up question, though. So we would report in the first line regular households from the LIHEAP block grant plus CARES Act grant-assisted households, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We have another question from someone else. If we did not use CARES funding, do we have to enter 0, or can these fields be left blank?
I believe you have to enter 0. I'll double check that, but I believe you would have to put in 0 to make sure that information gets through.
We have another question. What about CARES Act funds that came to the state and then to the LIHEAP program? These funds have a different CFDA number.
Yes, I think that relates to my earlier point. Maybe Melissa can help me if I'm not clear about it. If the funds were not issued as federal LIHEAP CARES Act funds issued by OCS to you, then they would count as a different type of non-federal, basically a non-federal source of funds, and would not be included.
Sorry, it's kind of the, they used to tell people in weatherization that if $1 of DOE funds touched a household, then you needed to report it on the, in the DOE weatherization report. It's similar with LIHEAP. No matter what combination of funds you use to serve the household, if even $1 of that combination was LIHEAP, then you're going to count those households in the household report.
Right.
Okay, we have another question. The question is, we used our CARES money to issue a separate CARES benefit. The CARES isn't really part of a regular heating or cooling. How should we report that?
That's a good question. So the household report asks you to report using specific categories. As you know, there's heating assistance, cooling assistance. There's different crisis assistance categories. So each grantee needs to decide and identify which category to classify their CARES assistance based on how you design your new benefit or the new benefits you're issuing. For some states, you may have used CARES for one type of benefit, or you might have targeted them to one group of households. So it makes it a bit more straightforward. For other grantees, you might have to report households that got CARES benefits in multiple categories. As with your regular funds, if you're providing a benefit to help households with their heating costs, you would consider that to be heating assistance. If you're helping them with cooling costs, cooling assistance, and so forth. For crisis assistance, as I showed in that one example, if you do have the option, if you used CARES funds to provide a new form of crisis assistance that you didn't have previously, you can report that under one of the other crisis fields and write in that program name and the amount of households served.
Okay, we have another question. In the case that the same household received regular LIHEAP benefits and CARES Act benefits too, do we need to count them twice on the heating line and once on the CARES Act row?
No, what you would do is you would report them once in the first line, in the total line, and once on the CARES line. So for every line on the household report, in section 1, for every line where you're reporting the total number by type of assistance and by those funding categories, you count a household only once. So even if a household got a benefit with regular funds and then later got a benefit with CARES funds, and they're both heating assistance, you'd still only count that household once because the focus is on the number of households, not the number of benefits or the number of different funding pools used.
Okay, those are all the questions that I see. So we do have a question ourselves for the audience. So, Dan, I don't know if you want to guide them through the question.
Oh, yeah. If you could please answer this poll. These are really helpful for us because we try to use your feedback and we want to make our trainings as helpful as possible. So the question is, how confident are you that you understand how to correctly complete the FY20 household report? Very confident, somewhat confident, not too confident, not at all confident. It's anonymous, and what we look at these and try to use them. As Melissa mentioned, we will be having a more detailed webinar on the FY20 household report in early December. So we will be preparing more detailed guidance if you fall into a category where you're not very confident. I did want to also mention if you face, as the one question indicated, if you find anything when you're in OLDC, the form doesn't seem to have these new lines, reach out to us as well so we can provide assistance. And if you're needing any other help or questions that come to mind after the webinar is over, feel free to email us and we'll get back to you. Okay. Did you finish running the poll? Okay. So this is really helpful. This will help us on the next webinar. As I mentioned, if you fall into the not too confident category, we would recommend you attend the next webinar where we'll go more in detail. And I recommend you download the 2 items we attached here. Any other last minute questions, Jorge?
Yes, we have a couple. The first one is, I believe I heard Dan saying that for a state that has state funds, if a household has been assisted with a combination of HHS and state funds, are we to include this households in the LIHEAP report as it is partially assisted with HHS funds?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and the last question, do we have any different eligibility criteria for CARES benefits to be eligible?
Melissa can probably help me with this one. I believe grantees had flexibility in terms of how they could set up to use their CARES funds and define eligibility as long as it's in line with the LIHEAP statute. Melissa, is there anything else you can say on that point?
No, that's correct, but I think that for the household report, that won't, for example, if you used a different eligibility threshold for these CARES Act funds, that's not going to really affect this report. It will impact your grantee survey report. You'll have to, that may look a little bit different in the CARES Act line of your grantee survey report. And we'll do training on that as soon as we get the date and guidance from OCS.
Okay, Dan, we don't have any more questions at the moment.
Well, we really appreciate all your time and joining us today, especially with limited advance notice. Please reach out to us with questions. You'll be receiving emails soon about the second webinar, and we look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you very much.